The summoning, he thought the silk meant honor, not erasure. He believed obedience would keep him safe. He did not know his name was about to be taken, not recorded. And he did not know the door closing behind him would never open again. At 19, he had been told he was chosen for service, a phrase polished enough to hide its meaning. He was bathed by strangers who never met his eyes, dressed in silk that did not belong to him, instructed on how to walk, how to lower his gaze, how to breathe without sound. Every movement was corrected, not for etiquette, but for compliance. The palace corridor swallowed his footsteps, its walls absorbing fear the way stone absorbs cold. No one explained where he was going, because explanation implies choice, and choice had already been removed. The palace of the Tang dynasty was not simply a residence. It was a system built to sort human beings into use and silence. Officials memorized ritual. Concubines memorized waiting. Servants memorized invisibility. And now, young men like him were learning something new. How easily a life could be reassigned. His name was taken by a clerk who did not write it down. It was spoken once, quietly, and replaced by a number that would never be used aloud again. Behind a screen, there was breathing. Soft, controlled, patient. It was not the sound of desire. It was the sound of authority. He felt it before he saw it, the weight of a presence that did not need to announce itself. This was not an audience with an emperor. This was access being measured, assessed, and absorbed. He understood then that this night was not about pleasure. It was about proximity to power, and proximity was the most dangerous position in the empire. The woman behind the curtain was not a rumor or a scandal invented by enemies. She was policy made flesh. Her name was Wu Zetian, and by the time he entered that room, she no longer needed the throne to command obedience. She had already inverted the system that once consumed her. What emperors before her had done openly, she now did with precision, secrecy, and consequence. History often begins her story at the moment she takes power, but the truth is colder. It begins earlier, with a girl born into a world that did not bend for women, who was not raised for rule. She was trained, like all others, for survival. As a teenager sent into the palace as a secondary concubine, she learned the mechanics of power by watching who spoke and who vanished. Silence taught her more than favor ever could. When the emperor died and she was sent away to a convent, the court assumed she was erased. They mistook withdrawal for weakness. Her return was not luck. It was calculation. When she re-entered the palace and rose again, she did not merely replace rivals. She studied the architecture of control itself. When illness silenced the emperor beside her, she spoke in his place. When scholars objected, she promoted talent over blood. When tradition resisted, she reframed tradition as law. And when she finally claimed the throne outright, she understood that power needed more than decrees. It needed information before it became rebellion. That was when the private chambers became political space. The men selected were not chosen for strength or pedigree. They were chosen for youth, beauty, intelligence, and the ability to disappear without consequence. They were trained to listen without reacting, to observe without recording, to exist without belonging. To be close to Wu Zetian was to live inside a test that never ended. The boy in silk did not know this history. He only knew the air felt heavier as he stepped forward, and that the screen between them did not move. He did not yet understand that once chosen, there was no leaving, only replacement. And as he knelt, hearing the quiet breath behind the curtain steady and unchanging, he realized too late that the greatest danger was not punishment, but favor. Because in this palace, those who were seen most clearly were the first to disappear. The girl who learned to watch before she ruled men, she learned how to endure being owned. Before she commanded silence, she survived it. And before history named her a monster, it taught her how power really works. Wu was 14 when the palace gates closed behind her for the first time. old enough to understand fear and young enough to be ignored. She entered as one of many secondary concubines, interchangeable lives wrapped in ceremony, each trained to wait without expectation. The court called it honor, but honor did not choose, did not speak, did not leave. Inside the palace, time stretched unnaturally. Days were measured not by events, but by absences. Who had been summoned? Who had not returned? Who was no longer mentioned? Wu was rarely noticed, and that invisibility became her shield. While others chased favor, she watched patterns. She learned how a glance could elevate or destroy, how a servant's whisper carried more weight than a general's report, how silence was used not to preserve peace, but to erase witnesses. She memorized faces, habits, alliances. She did not compete, she observed. The palace rewarded beauty briefly, but it rewarded understanding forever. When Emperor Taizong died, tradition moved quickly. Concubines were not meant to outlive their usefulness. Wu was sent to a Buddhist convent, a polite burial for women the court no longer required. Officially, it was devotion. In reality, it was erasure. The world assumed her story ended there, shaved hair replacing silk, prayer replacing ambition. But the convent did not empty her mind. It sharpened it. Isolation gave her clarity. She understood then that the system did not hate women. It consumed them. It rewarded obedience and punished memory. So Wu did the opposite. She remembered everything. Names, slights, structures. And when fate cracked the door open again, she was ready. Her return to the palace defied every rule that claimed to protect order. She came back not as a ghost, but as a consort to the new emperor, Gaozong, the son of the man who once owned her future. The court whispered. Scholars protested. No precedents justified her presence. But Wu did not ask permission. She brought leverage. She brought timing. And she brought an understanding of power that none of them possessed. As the emperor's health weakened, her influence strengthened. She listened while others spoke. She watched while others celebrated. Decisions began passing through her hands before they were announced. Officials found themselves promoted or dismissed without knowing why. Rivals disappeared without accusation. Blood was rarely visible. Absence was enough. When she finally declared herself emperor, the empire trembled, not because she was cruel, but because she was efficient. She promoted commoners who performed and punished nobles who failed. She reorganized institutions that had rotted under tradition. The law obeyed her because it worked. But legitimacy does not quiet fear, and fear was everywhere. Wu understood something the men before her had never questioned. Intimacy was power. Proximity was surveillance. For centuries, women's bodies had been used to stabilize rule, traded for heirs, alliances, and loyalty. Wu reversed the direction, not out of indulgence, but out of strategy. She created a space where closeness to the ruler meant exposure, where beauty became liability, and where favor was temporary by design. The men selected for her private chambers did not understand this at first. They believed they were chosen for desire. They were wrong. They were chosen because they could be broken, reshaped, and replaced. Each one was a test, not of loyalty, but of control. And as the palace adjusted to this new, unspoken order, one man rose faster than the rest, mistaking proximity for protection, unaware that being closest to the throne only made the fall more precise. When power changed direction, what emperors had done openly for centuries suddenly became unforgivable, not because it was cruel, but because it was reversed. The court did not fear desire. It feared losing control of it. When Wu Zetian secured the throne, the empire expected chaos, bloodshed, or collapse. None came. Instead, something far more unsettling unfolded. The machinery of the state continued to function, smoother than before, but the direction of power had shifted. Ministers bowed, laws were enforced, borders held. Yet beneath the order, a silent panic spread. Because the old assumptions no longer worked. The ruler was no longer predictable. The rules that had protected men for centuries no longer applied. For generations, emperors had maintained vast harems, selecting women as symbols of dominance, fertility, and political alliance. No one questioned it. It was tradition, framed as necessity. But when Wu Zetian mirrored the same structure, the court recoiled. Not because it was immoral, but because it exposed a truth they had never wanted named. The body had always been political. She had simply removed the illusion. Wu did not announce the change. There was no decree declaring a new order of intimacy. It emerged quietly through administrative language and ceremonial titles. The qanoon was presented as a religious and cultural institution, a place of ritual service and private counsel. In reality, it became something else entirely. A controlled space where selected men were brought close to the ruler, not to rule beside her, but to be studied, tested, and used. The selection process was meticulous. Officials were encouraged to offer sons and relatives as gestures of loyalty. Agents traveled discreetly through provinces, observing young men in academies, temples, and markets. They were not chosen for ambition or strength. Those were liabilities. They were chosen for adaptability, silence, and the ability to disappear without causing ripples. Youth mattered. Beauty mattered. But obedience mattered most. Once inside the palace, training began. Not in pleasure, but in restraint. They were taught how to listen without reacting, how to observe posture, hesitation, tone. They learned which questions were never asked and which answers were expected without being spoken. Their lives became structured around waiting. Waiting to be summoned. Waiting to be dismissed. Waiting to be forgotten. To the outside world, they were rumored lovers. Inside the palace, they were instruments. Wu Zetian understood that proximity revealed more than interrogation ever could. Men spoke freely when they believed themselves favored. Secrets surfaced in moments of vulnerability. Alliances were exposed through careless words whispered too close to the throne. The qanoon became the empire's nervous system, transmitting information long before rebellion could take shape. Among them, one man rose faster than anyone anticipated. Feng Shoubao, later renamed Huai, came from obscurity, lacking lineage or formal education. His rise was sudden and absolute. To legitimize his presence, he was ordained as a Buddhist monk, a transformation that masked ambition with sanctity. He built temples, commanded resources, and spoke with authority, borrowed directly from the throne. Officials bowed to him not because he was feared, but because he was close. Huai mistook access for immunity. He humiliated monks, insulted ministers, and displayed power openly, forgetting the lesson Wu had learned as a girl. Visibility invites correction. His confidence grew louder, his behavior more reckless. The court watched in silence, unsure whether he was untouchable or already condemned. The moment he crossed the line was not political. It was personal. A dispute with Wu Zetian escalated beyond repair, and in a fit of rage, Huai ordered the burning of the Hall of Light, a structure that symbolized her authority and divine mandate. Flames consumed wood and stone, but what truly burned was his protection. The response was swift and invisible. Huai vanished. No trial, no announcement. His death was reported quietly, his body disposed of without ceremony, his name erased from records as if he had never existed. The court understood the message immediately. Favor was not safety. It was a test. And as the ashes settled, another figure entered the chambers, quieter, more cautious, and far more dangerous because he did not seek power at all. The favorite who burned too bright, he was not born powerful. He was not trained to rule. He was simply close enough to mistake access for immunity. And closeness, in this palace, was a death sentence. The man history remembers, as Huai did not arrive with ceremony. He entered quietly, almost accidentally, pulled from obscurity because someone noticed how easily he listened. His original name barely mattered. Names were temporary inside the palace. What mattered was how well a man could adapt to silence. He was young, unconnected, and unremarkable enough to be reshaped. That made him useful. That made him dangerous. His rise was sudden, and that was the first mistake. To legitimize his presence near the throne, he was ordained as a Buddhist monk, draped in sanctity to hide proximity. Robes replaced silk. Titles replaced anonymity. The court watched carefully as doors opened for him that had remained sealed for generations. He walked where ministers waited. He spoke where scholars bowed. He did not command armies, yet soldiers cleared paths for him. He did not pass examinations, yet officials obeyed his gestures. From the outside, it looked like indulgence. From inside the palace, it was surveillance perfected. Wahid was not merely a companion. He was an extension of the ruler's will, placed deliberately among those who believed themselves untouchable. Ministers relaxed around him. Secrets slipped. Complaints surfaced. Disloyalty revealed itself without interrogation. Power always speaks when it thinks it is safe. But power also intoxicates those closest to it. Wahid began to believe the whispers. He began to enjoy the fear in others' eyes. He humiliated senior monks publicly, certain that religious robes shielded him. He mocked officials, confident that proximity to the throne meant protection. The palace did not correct him. Silence, after all, is not mercy. It is measurement. Wu Zetian watched without interruption. She had learned long ago that arrogance reveals more than obedience ever could. Wahid's confidence grew louder, his movements less careful. He forgot that the palace rewarded usefulness, not loyalty. He forgot that visibility invited correction. Most dangerously, he forgot that favor was not affection. It was a test with an end. The breaking point did not come from politics. It came from pride. After a dispute with the empress, Wahid crossed into unforgivable territory. In an act that stunned even those accustomed to excess, he ordered the burning of the Hall of Light, a structure that symbolized Wu Zetian's authority and divine mandate. Flames tore through wood and stone, sending smoke across the capital. The message was unmistakable. He believed himself beyond consequence. The palace responded with silence. No arrest followed. No public outrage. No emergency council. The calm was more terrifying than punishment. Days passed. Wahid was not summoned. His name was not spoken. Servants avoided the corridors he once occupied. Then, without announcement, he vanished. No trial recorded his crimes. No edict explained his absence. He was ambushed quietly, killed without ceremony, and erased with precision. His body was disposed of. His titles dissolved. His existence was reduced to whispers that carried no proof. The court understood immediately. Favor was not safety. It was exposure. To be close to Wu Zetian was to live inside a narrowing circle, where every step forward reduced the space to retreat. Those who rose too fast fell without sound. Those who believed themselves loved were already condemned. After Wahid, the selection changed. The next man was quieter. He did not seek titles. He did not insult officials. He did not test boundaries. He understood the lesson Wahid never learned. Survival depended not on dominance, but on restraint. The palace adjusted, and the system refined itself. And somewhere deep within the private chambers, another figure entered the shadows, not to rule, not to rebel, but to endure unaware that endurance itself was the final test, and that even silence had a limit. The man who survived by disappearing, he did not arrive with ambition. He did not ask for favor. He did not rise. And that was precisely why he lasted. After Wahid vanished, the palace changed its breathing. Corridors felt narrower. Servants spoke less. Ministers recalculated every word before it left their mouths. The lesson had been delivered without explanation, and everyone understood it clearly. Proximity to the throne was not reward, it was exposure. Wu Zetian did not need another spectacle. She needed refinement. The next man chosen was everything wahid was not. Shen Nanshu entered the chambers without ceremony, without noise, and without history that could be traced easily. Some said he had been a musician. Others claimed a physician. A few believed he was a poet. The truth mattered less than the fact that he never corrected their rumors. Ambiguity became his shield. He did not seek titles. He did not demand privileges. When others spoke, he listened. When others displayed fear, he absorbed it. His presence was so quiet that officials forgot he was there, and forgetting is when people reveal the most. Shen Nanshu understood what survival required inside this system. Visibility killed. Silence prolonged. Wu Zetian noticed immediately. Not because he impressed her, but because he did not. He did not confuse access with importance. He never assumed safety. When summoned, he arrived. When dismissed, he vanished. He asked no questions, yet heard everything. The palace rewarded him not with authority, but with continuity. Around him, the khaon evolved. The men were no longer allowed to grow arrogant. Training intensified. They were taught restraint over indulgence, observation over reaction. Their lives were regulated to the smallest detail. Where they walked, what they heard, how long they remained in a room. Intimacy was no longer even rumored. The illusion of pleasure faded. What remained was function. Shen Nanshu became a constant. He moved between chambers unnoticed, carrying fragments of conversations that never appeared in records. He learned how ministers betrayed one another in whispers, how loyalty fractured under pressure, how fear reshaped belief. Wu Zetian did not interrogate him. She did not need to. Information reached her naturally, as breath reaches the lungs. The court, however, grew uneasy. A man who did not rise could not be measured. A man who did not fall could not be warned. Shen Nanshu inspired a different kind of fear. Not the loud kind wahid had provoked, but a quiet one, the kind that spreads through uncertainty. Officials wondered what he knew. They wondered what he had already said. They wondered whether silence itself had become a weapon. Yet Shen Nanshu was not safe. No one inside the palace was. He understood that survival depended on balance, and balance was temporary. Wu Zetian's system did not value individuals. It valued results. Endurance was not loyalty. It was usefulness sustained over time. As years passed, opposition to Wu Zetian hardened beyond the palace walls. Confucian scholars sharpened their arguments. Princes calculated succession. The idea of a woman emperor remained intolerable to many, no matter how effective her rule. And as pressure mounted, the private chambers grew more dangerous, not less. Information became heavier. Secrets became lethal. Shen Nanshu felt the shift before it was spoken. Summons became shorter. Silences grew longer. The air inside the chambers tightened. He realized then that the system was entering its final phase. When power feels threatened, it stops refining and starts cutting. He prepared for disappearance the only way one could in the palace, by leaving nothing behind. Because when the empire finally moved against Wu Zetian, it would not strike the throne first. It would strike the shadows closest to it. The mirror history buried, they did not destroy the system. They erased the witnesses. Then they rewrote the story, and called the truth a scandal. When the end came, it did not arrive as a collapse. Empires rarely fall that way. It came as correction. Wu Zetian was old, her grip on the throne still firm, but surrounded by men who had waited their entire lives for time to do what rebellion could not. Ministers spoke carefully. Princes smiled too often. Loyalty remained, but belief had thinned. The empire obeyed her authority while preparing for her absence. Inside the palace, the private chambers grew quieter. Summons slowed. The khaon no longer expanded. It contracted. Men were dismissed without explanation, reassigned to monasteries, distant provinces, or simply erased from records. No accusations were issued because accusations leave evidence. Silence was cleaner. Shen Nanshu understood before anyone else that survival no longer depended on restraint. It depended on disappearance. He reduced his presence until it barely registered. He avoided corridors once familiar. He left rooms before conversations ended. He became forgettable by design. In the palace, being forgotten was the closest thing to freedom. When Wu Zetian was finally forced to abdicate, there was no public reckoning, no trial, no execution. She was allowed to live because killing her would have admitted she mattered too much. The new rulers restored the Tang dynasty and immediately began repairing something far more fragile than law, narrative. Records were revised. Language was sharpened. What had been governance became perversion. What had been policy became excess. The male harem vanished from official history first. Names were removed, roles blurred, functions rebranded as rumor. What could not be erased was distorted. Wu Zetian was no longer remembered as an efficient ruler who weaponized proximity. She became something simpler, safer, and more controllable. A monster driven by desire. The irony was deliberate. Male emperors with thousands of concubines remained symbols of strength. A woman who mirrored the same structure became proof of moral decay. History did not condemn the act. It condemned the inversion. The mirror was too clear, and mirrors are dangerous to those who benefit from forgetting. The men were never mourned. No monuments marked their absence. No families were compensated. Their lives had been reassigned, not lost. Shen Nanku's fate was never recorded. Perhaps he reached a monastery. Perhaps he died anonymously. Perhaps he succeeded at what waqai never understood, lasting by leaving nothing behind. Wu Zetian died years later, buried with honors she no longer controlled. Scholars debated her cruelty and ignored her systems. Texts accused her of indulgence and overlooked her efficiency. The truth survived only in fragments, hidden in contradictions scholars preferred not to reconcile. Because if history admitted what she truly built, it would have to admit something far more unsettling. That power had never been moral. That bodies had always been political. And that what terrified the empire was not what Wu Zetian did, but how clearly she exposed the rules everyone else followed without question. In the end, the male harem was not a deviation. It was a revelation. And like all revelations that threaten the foundation of belief, it was buried, mislabeled, and turned into a warning instead of a lesson, not because it was false, but because it was too honest.